And we have a responsibility to also role model all of those behaviors that you want to see. And I think all of those things are the essence at plus one more, which is talent density and hiring great talent. Like all of that is the prerequisite for you to be able to say, yeah, you know what, teams should run wild a little bit.
Welcome to the Unlearn podcast, where host Barry O'Reilly seeks to synthesize the superpowers of extraordinary individuals to think big, start small, and learn fast. Here's your host, Barry O'Reilly.
Welcome to the Unlearn podcast. On this show, I'm delighted to be joined by Yi-Wei Ang, Chief Product Officer at Talabat and Delivery Hero, the largest online food ordering company in the Middle East. Now, Yi-Wei is on a mission to create product-led organizations that are customer-obsessed, data-driven, and experimentation-focused. He wants to leverage the power of technology to solve customer problems and the company's challenges. He wants to focus on the long term and not get stuck in quarter-to-quarter targets, but adapt to the markets at the speed at which they learn. He's lived in 6 different countries, led teams from 20 more, and is responsible for Talabat's rapid growth throughout the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and more. On this show, you'll get a very unique insight in what it takes to lead teams all over the world, enter new markets, and create product-led businesses. But before that, let's hear how he got started.
When I was about 7 or 8, my uncle on my mother's side was doing his undergrad in computer science. And I happened to be around and I was observing, back in the days, I guess, a terminal of sorts or an editor of sorts where he was punching in a bunch of code and something came out on the other end. And that for me was an aha moment around the ability for us as humans and as people to be able to put something in text and be able to create something out of that works, that does something, that you can get it to move and do things. And that for me was an aha moment where I told myself at the time, like, this is the coolest thing that I've ever seen. So when I was 10 or 11, I started programming. I started learning how to code. I started playing around with computers. And since then, I knew that I wanted to do something in tech. I knew that I wanted to create. I knew that I wanted to build. And I kept working at that. Then when I got to undergrad, things changed a little bit. I initially came in as a computer engineer, but then found a sweet spot where I was doing a course on a subject matter that I'd never thought about ever in my life. It was called human factors engineering. And
wow, that's
topic around,
wow. Yeah, you're right. It's like the coolest topic in the world now as well. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So this is human factors engineering. And I remember back in the days, this was before, the Web 2.0 boom and things like that. And before it became hot. Human factors engineering at the time, we were talking about examples of designing airplane cockpits and production floors and how you minimize mistakes and errors and pilot mistakes. And there were so many case studies of how human errors, whether in a medical context or airline context, cause fatalities. And then it struck me that, okay, what I really wanted to be in was not just technology, but connecting technology with solving real human problems. And that intersection between humans and technology is that sweet spot, which I wanted to say, okay, I'm going to go into UX and research. So I spent actually my first job ever in a role at IBM doing UX research. I joined their DB2 team, which for those who know is IBM's database product. And I was designing experiences on their terminal. So what happens if you have a database that needed a 3-day backup and you got into work and you're like, is this backup happening or not? Like, is it working or not? And my job was to design experiences in the terminal that showed the administrator that, hey, it worked. So that's how I ended up in the sphere of sort of the intersection between humans and technology.
It's fascinating to hear you share that, especially human factors and resilient systems engineering that's the frontier of DevOps now. See people like John Allspaw who went and did this. There's a famous course in Lund University where people go and do this master's, which is all about human factors and resilient systems engineering. And, you've got everybody there from like the leaders at Netflix to doctors to physicians, all talking about how to create safe systems or how to deal with human error or how to create responsive or robust and resilient systems. And I actually got a chance to actually go to one of the workshops that they held for the last course here when we could be in person. It was actually held at Slack's offices, and it was one of the most fascinating 3 days I think I spent in my life, just like listening to doctors talk about the resiliency of bone and then have John Allspaw talk about how they did use the same principles to start doing 50 deployments a day at Etsy, and all about this sort of systems safety engineering. And I was just like, my mind just exploded. So it's fascinating that you found your way into something like that, because it's so important now as we're building these really complex systems, not that they are perfect, but they are responsive, or they were robust and resilient. They can respond to change because they're just so complex, right? Like we can't simplify things. We have to manage the complexity. And I know there's shades of that I see even in the product work and your own journey, which is kind of fascinating to hear how that has sort of played out for yourself over time.
It's one of the things that I think is still underplayed today in the product world. It's still one of the foundations that I highly encourage product people to go through, which is understanding humans at the heart of it, right? What are our limitations? What can we remember? What can't we remember? And remembering that, at the end of the day, like if we think about what great design is and great experiences are, it's not just it's beautiful. How the thought process that goes behind every decision you make, every text that you put in is anchored on the end user.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Yeah, no, I love when these dots get joined because, we had Casey Roanhall on the show who led the chaos team at Netflix, right? And has created this field of chaos engineering, and was actually the person who brought me to this Lund University workshop. And all of those folks are just so deep into, resilient systems engineering and human factors for safety and systems design for these, like all the systems that run Netflix. So their idea of the chaos monkey that sort of randomly shuts down services in their architecture so they can make it more resilient. Like they just turn off AWS in Europe and see if they can reroute all the traffic to North America. So when we're watching Netflix, it doesn't skip, like that's the way they're thinking about, as you say, the design. It's not just, does it look pretty? It's like, can it respond to unplanned exceptions? And I think it's really fascinating when, I can see this as you build it into your own sort of product career, right? You're not only thinking about, does it look nice? You're deep into what does it affect the user, the language, the words, bring the teams together. So share a little bit like how you've brought that to life, because
Yes.
You've spent time in Microsoft working on the Visual Studio team, which is fascinating. And then teaching people obviously through General Assembly before you sort of have gone into working for Trade Geico and all these different companies about building all these different types of products and really growing them, like significantly growing them from, scaling these up from a couple of hundreds, to millions of users. So share some like the things that have been on your sort of leadership journey to chief product officers now at like Talabat and, like leading these like product leaders type scenarios. Like what have been some of the transitions that you've had to unlearn or shift along that path?
Quite a lot. I think one of the beautiful parts about I've been fortunate enough to move to different countries, to work in different contexts and different environments, is that every time I move and physically uproot myself and move to a new place, it also is an opportunity to hit the reset button. I often do a deep retrospective to say, whether it's in my personal life, whether it's in my health and fitness, whether it's my work, how do I want to do things differently? I've now also tried to fold that, if I physically don't want to move, how do I still make sure that I continue in that routine, whether on a quarterly basis, to really start reflecting back? And I have a set of questions that I ask myself to make sure that across work, across my personal life, I really think through things and how I can change. And it's funny because now I have a couple people on my team who've actually been with me since my very early product leadership days at Trade Gecko. And, worked with me then and worked with me now. And maybe as you speak with some of these people, they'll tell you about how my leadership style has really changed. Leadership in product is a very tricky one because product on one hand is a very, very young and new discipline. So the definitions of what a great product leader is and how to do great product leadership is still relatively young and undefined. Where it is now, I still think that we're somewhere in between and we're learning a couple of tactics. We're learning a couple of methodologies. We're seeing some best practices. I'm now debating some best practices with some of the best product leaders out there. But, it's not like we've had 100 years of tried and tested methodology of how we should be running product.
Absolutely, yeah.
Very early on in my career, one thing that I knew I didn't want to build a product organization that was all just about being a feature factory and pumping out as much code as possible and just feature after feature after feature. I knew that I wanted to build an organization or organizations that had people who were passionate about problem solving, and could really go deep in customer problem, solve these complex systems and problems like you were alluding to. One of the biggest things that I had to unlearn, though, was that as much as I wanted people to feel like they could drive and they could have a lot of autonomy and they could move fast and make a lot of independent decisions, is that I interpreted that early on in my product leadership career that meant complete freedom and autonomy and what I call today kumbaya leadership, where as a PM, you decide what do you think the company's biggest priorities are that you can contribute to, and what you think the team should work on, and how you want to organize the team. Go forth and drive. And as weeks gone by and months gone by, what I've noticed was two symptoms, right? One, we were very misaligned in the efforts that we were going through. One team was working on something, another team was working on something, and this didn't seem to have a compounding effect to add on to each other's work. And secondly, we made commitments that we were constantly missing, both of which were a bit concerning. As I started maturing and thinking a little bit harder about it, we were fortunate enough to have a dinner with Marty Cagan when he came to Dubai a couple of years ago, when we hosted him here, where something that he said really struck me, which is something along the lines of people are not looking for less management. They're looking for better management. And really struck a chord that, first of all, being a product leader is a lot of work. First, recognize that and be okay with that. And find a way to build the environment, the context, have the right critical mass of talent, and a lot of ingredients that need to come into play that allows the teams to really run as quickly as they can and make a lot of decisions and learn as quickly as they can and pivot as much as they can, but in the context and with sufficient context and direction. That's a very key thing that I've grown over the last couple of years in. Happy to share a few more examples of how this is sort of
it resonates
showing up
massively. Yeah, no, it resonates massively. It's one of these things sometimes where people hear the stories about teams are autonomous and they make decisions for themselves and they make all the choices. And it almost sounds mythical, I think, sometimes about this sort of environments where, like, how can people be so free flowing with no constraints in a way? Sometimes it's a danger, right? Because I think what you're already alluding to, or what you learned as well, is that part of being a leader is actually setting some constraints, getting people to commit to delivering things. And sure, give them the space to be expressive and bring their ideas to life. But innovation needs constraints, and teams need commitments to be held to actually build more trust and deliver things for each other. And I think sometimes we fall into a little bit of a trap of making it sound like people can do what they want. That's not the case. Share a little bit more about how you've managed yourself to strike that balance between structure and systems, but still give people space to operate and be creative within, so they do feel like they are contributing to where they want to go, but it's still giving you the opportunity to set the direction and the sort of guide rails which to operate in.
Yeah, 100%. So the first thing I had to do was to take a step back and think a little bit about what is it that I wanted? What is it that in a product organization I really wanted to see? A couple of things came to mind, right? First of all, it's very clear that I did want to have an organization that was what I call top-down micromanaged. A lot of people misinterpret what I'm saying as saying, oh, well, if you don't want to give autonomy, then it must be that you tell everyone exactly what features.
Right, it's the other end of the spectrum.
It's the other end of the spectrum, and it's completely not that at all. So I want to be, very clear, and that was the first thing I wanted to put line in the sand is what I don't want is I don't want an organization that is micromanaged. That it's not like they're getting the OKRs, straight front and center. They're getting a bunch of features that the business needs to build. Not that. Right. I also didn't want an organization that was just a feature factory where it's the business going, I want this feature, this feature, this feature, this feature. So a couple of things that I did want, not top-down micromanagement, building an organization where you have a bunch of people that are very close to the problem and trusting the team that are close to the problem to be able to solve that problem. But the picking of the problem and the focus on the problem is very important. And thirdly is focus, right? Too many product organizations, especially if you let the team sort of say, pick any problem that you want to solve, suffer from the problem that they have 8 different areas that they could potentially jump in. And they're constantly looking at 8 different areas and they're spreading themselves too thin. And as an organization, you're not giving them enough sort of protection and guardrails to say, you know what, if you want to pick a problem and go down at it, let's leave the 7 aside and let's give you that ability to stay focused on that one problem to solve. That's very powerful. And as I think about building product organizations, those are the things that I sort of have in mind as the framework for what I think we should design for.
I was going to say the focus one is a great one. It's probably one of the most counterintuitive things probably in any sort of building products, right? Like the ability to actually give teams to sort of say, instead of trying to focus on 10 things, just do one thing and find out if it's a thing worth doing or not doing. And it's very hard, right? Because the natural inclination it's like this notion of limiting work in progress, right? If we have a list of 10 things, people will still try and do all the 10 things on the list at the same time and get nothing done, versus saying, right, we've 10 things on this list. What's the first most important? Let's do something, get a result, and decide, do we keep doing it or move on? And we never seem to do that. So definitely as a chief product officer, you do have a finite amount of resources and time and people and things to explore. How do you strike that balance with your teams? Like, what are some of the examples from working with the teams where, you were able to help them just sort of actually keep the focus to like get a result that helped you make the next decision to say, do I keep doing this? Do I stop doing this? Do I do something different?
This is a very, very interesting point that you tackled. One thing that I've observed, the symptom I've observed in many companies that I've been in, is that the business has a bunch of different asks. That's very common. The customers are asking for a bunch of different things as well. And that makes focusing very hard, extremely hard. And there's a bit of a fear of missing out factor to say, no, don't just focus on this one thing, like tackle these 10 things as well. The thing that often we don't spend enough time on, and I believe is that the crux of product leadership, is the ability for product leaders to help the team pick the one thing that actually matters. And I think that's very important. Debate to say, out of these 10 things, let's actually find the biggest lever for us to actually chase down. And as I'm learning, as I'm growing in product leadership as well, I'm also observing that what the business is often most uncomfortable with, or what the business is most uncomfortable with, is not picking the right problems to solve. That they're afraid that you go down 6 months down the road and you're solving a problem that, actually, like this is another pool of things that we should be focusing on instead. And as I think about what better management is and better leadership is, it's about setting context. It's about, first of all, really building a strong conviction as a product leader about what that context is. Longer term, where are we headed as a company? Where are we headed as a product? A very clear vision and direction that you want to go in, and working backwards to say, okay, what are the 2 or 3 levers that really will help us get there? That is how we achieve focus, as opposed to saying, okay, I'm just going to pick one and I'm just going to chase it down. But how? What is the rationale behind that? That debate and that strong rationale and the strong data backing and experimentation that led you to that point is something that as product leaders, we should be really focusing on time on.
So bring this to life in an example for us. You've worked in Delivery Hero at Talabat. You're now in Talabat, like you're running the whole show basically, right? So, and this is solving like opening in new markets all throughout the Middle East and into Asia, into Europe, different cultures, different constraints, different government laws. Like this is complex stuff. And culturally dealing with different teams and offices that are all based in these locations. So how do you square those circles? How are you helping those teams, give them the help and the direction that context that they need of the wider company, but also understanding like locally there's differences? Maybe you can share some anecdotes of the examples of like what's different about operating in Egypt as opposed to the UAE, as opposed to Turkey, or because I don't think many people get that type of product insight.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because that's exactly kind of the example I was going to use, where we have markets that operate very differently. We have markets with very different purchasing power. We have markets that are very different in maturity and tech adoption and credit card adoption and buyer behavior. The way that we look at it is we often split it into, I tell my product team, look, the 3 sort of ends of the spectrum. You have Kuwait, where we've operated the longest, and it's one of our largest markets that we have a strong presence in, so we have a lot of history on. The Talabat brand it's a bit of an institution. That's a different kind of market. On the other hand, you have the UAE, which is the most probably technologically advanced market in the markets that we operate. Also very strong competition. There's a lot of players in here, and we're constantly pushing ourselves to really be the 10 out of 10, when it comes to the brand new kind of experiences and services that we provide. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have been in Egypt for a while now. Egypt is a very different country, much larger, much bigger footprint, many different smaller tier cities that we're entering ourselves into, and with a consumer behavior that arguably is very different than perhaps more the expats in the UAE. We recently also opened in Iraq, where there are compliance regulations. We have to do KYC when people sign up for the product. It really is very, very different. Now, the challenge with building an organization or a product across all these different markets is that when you try and paint it with one brush, you often just get a bit of an average product across everyone.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's extremely challenging. And sometimes the inclination is to say, okay, fine, like maybe the way they would deal with it would just get all these markets together and get them to submit a bunch of requests. And we figure out like, okay, what are the points of commonality? What's everyone asking for the most? And let's ship that. Yeah. So that's, I think, the way I look at it, the easy way out. The harder conversation to have is, okay, of all these markets, what's burning? Like what's strategically most important for us? And what do we double down on? So to give you an example, when we looked at all the different markets and where operationally we needed a bit more attention to it. And one thing that we were looking at is, when restaurants were getting the orders, what percentage of orders went through and they successfully processed it versus the ones that had issues. Initially, we were like, okay, let's look at this problem holistically across all of our markets and solve it for all of the different markets. Then we said, how is it possible that, we have one product manager that sits in a country and has to do all of this work for all of these different markets, look at all the data for all these different markets and solve it holistically in a quarter, right? And really make a difference. And we asked the question, are we better off just picking one market, one problem, and really owning it? And we decided that's exactly what we would do. We would pick a market, the market that had the largest challenges. In this case, it was Egypt, which is one of our fastest growing markets. And let's go in there. Let's dig deep. Let's speak to restaurants. Let's physically go to restaurants and see what they do to process the orders. Why is it that they're taking so long to process the orders? Is it a staffing problem? Is it, do we have a connection problem? Is it because, the internet connection in some parts of Egypt is a bit spotty. So instead of using a Wi-Fi connection, we should be giving everybody 4G SIM cards so that the orders can be transmitted a bit more reliably. Those are the things that you can only get to if you have the level of depth and focus.
Detail. That's it. Yeah. Fabulous. I love these stories, right? Because it brings it to life to people. You can only learn that. You can look at the data all day, but you can only learn that you might need to actually give people 4G cards for their restaurants to have better connectivity to take orders by going there. Like you can only learn it by talking to them. You can look at orders all day and go, okay, but you cannot learn what your insight there until you go spend time with people.
Exactly. So this is what it takes to get focused, right? So first on the business side, really agreeing that, hey, guys, like where we're really hurting is this market in this area. Okay, so let's go solve that problem and sort of put everything else on ice. So agreeing on the business side that's what we should be focusing on and giving the team the room to go deep, right? Aligning to that principle where the people closest to the problem should solve it and giving them the leeway to say, this is now your problem for 3 months and go nuts. Anything that you need to do, you need to pivot, you need to make quick decisions, go forth, right? But teams are only able to do that if they have sufficient context saying this is the most important problem, focus, and the trust that leadership empowers them to say, go, this is it. We want you guys to really own this.
Yeah, no, I love hearing these stories. They're the best, And so what other things then have you noticed even then as an organization? Being in Talabat now for like a number of years, you obviously started off in Delivery Hero and have now moved on to lead the actual organization from a product perspective. What are some of the changes you've seen in yourself, in the company, maybe as opposed to when you were working in property, or what sort of do you find is sort of the unique things about bringing like amazing food to everybody all over and all these amazing markets that you operate within? Like what are some of the sort of unlearning things you're seeing there?
My experience at Talabat has been nothing short of really, like I've enjoyed every moment of it. I've been here a year and a half in the Delivery Hero group. And one thing that amazes me is the scale at which this company operates in, right? We operate as Delivery Hero across many, many different countries with the belief that, if we have these entities like Talabat inside of a market, we can really win it and serve our customers better because all these entities are really close to the problem. I joined the organization when we had about 100 people in product and tech. We're now about 250 and looking to grow to about 400 at the end of the year. So we're growing really fast and with aggressive ambitions. And what's been impressing me about where we're at and where the company is the ambition. When I joined, we were a food delivery company. Now we're a quick commerce company, and we really believe in being able to deliver things to you in 20 minutes or less. And I still get messages from friends going, did I really just get my groceries in 15 minutes? What really impressed me about the company, and still today I have a hard time wrangling my head around, is the complexity of all the things that to be in place for this to happen. The technology that needs to go into it, but also the operational complexity that needs to go behind it. this is the first company I've worked in that's so operationally heavy. I've worked at companies like Microsoft and IBM and TradeGecko and Property Finder, where the product was basically a software product. Like if you made a change, you put it live and people use it and you see the improvements tomorrow. But that's not the case here, right? Like I can in my app say we do 3-minute delivery, but if we don't have drones that deliver it to you in 3 minutes, like it's not going to happen. So like we move physical goods. So that intersection between technology and the real world is a real interesting challenge for us. Absolutely, it pushes you to really innovate, not just on tech and what you can do in the software, but also in the real world, like really challenging ourselves of assumptions and digging deep into why is it that we can't do delivery in 10 minutes? Okay, what would it take for us to do that? Breaking it down to the key factors and solving it operationally as well. So what I love about the business and this new challenge is that constant push and pull between what do we solve with product, what do we solve operationally, and odds are both need to really have a big leap in order to serve our customers in a very different way.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. Like I think when you're building type of businesses that you're leading, the software it's just one component. It's a whole supply chain that you're trying to manage there and optimize. And ultimately, the customer looks to you. That's their interaction point, right? The software, whatever it is, the application that they use, like that's who they get frustrated with. If the delivery mechanism breaks down or the food is cold or whatever it is, like they don't get mad at the restaurant. They get mad at the people who interconnect,
who deliver
right?
the food.
So,
yeah. This is a very interesting point you brought up because it really speaks to, I've been talking a lot about the concept of product-led organizations. And this is a term now that seems to be thrown around a lot. And I guess everyone has a slightly different interpretation of it. But the way I'm interpreting it and the way I'm pushing for and driving my goal of building product-led organizations is one where we use technology and product to solve these problems end to end, right? I believe that if you apply the right technology to logistics, apply the right technology to how we pick things in stores, apply the right technology to the consumer experience, to how the customer care team answers requests, like there's an opportunity to really solve things, for different parts of the journey. But more importantly, that a product-led organization doesn't mean that I'm in the driving seat. I don't need to be in the driving seat, but it's the mindset to say, first of all, let's recognize that people don't care about your departments. They care about the end-to-end cycle, the journey from the time to make an order to when the driver appears in the door. And secondly, we have an opportunity to really tie that entire journey together and solve that holistically, whether it's using data or experimentation methodologies across operations and across the product, across what we do. And I think that's really exciting. And that's one of the biggest changes that we've seen at Talabat over the last year and a half is that mindset shift towards let's solve a bunch of things operationally and just put more people in the problem to how do we automate? How do we use tech to really start shaving things down? Yeah, no,
it's fascinating, Yi-Wei. It's just seeing, again, the scope and the breadth that you get to think about as well. It's even interesting as you describe that as a product-led organization as well, because most people, I think, who are in the product practice, most are thinking about an app, right? They're building a website and an app. And I think the components you're thinking about are an entire business, really. The operational excellence, the applications to support delivery staff, to support the restaurants, to support customers who are purchasing from the restaurants and using sort of your platform as a way to make that happen, right? And the benefit being that you get to actually synthesize all this data and see really interesting patterns to innovate. But it's hard to bring all these worlds together of customer demand, operational excellence, business performance, building out a market, attracting more players onto the platform, be it new restaurants, be it new delivery drivers, be it new... Like there's a lot of moving parts there. So as you're looking ahead then sort of to the future of this space, right? Like, you've alluded to like Talabat, you see it as actually a more like well beyond just food delivery services, right? Like you're starting to play in other spaces. So share a little bit about what you're sort of excited about or the things where your head is going as you think about the next incarnation of this business and you leading it.
Yeah, 100%. Food delivery continues to be the core of our business. We've been around in the food delivery business for a long time now. We still think there's a lot of problems to be solved there. Different occasions that you can solve for. Perhaps, how do you do things like, as people come to the office, how do you make food more affordable if people want to group buy food? We believe that in the food space as well, dine out as restaurants open up continues to be a very interesting problem, perhaps in a different context now as people don't necessarily want to order with physical menus, and they're looking for affordable options. And how do we do that? Now we're experimenting and launching in a couple of countries the ability for people to get one-for-one deals in restaurants and be able to pay with the QR code, sort of contactless. We're dabbling from an online food delivery space to also an offline experience. I think that's really interesting. But secondly, in the world of quick commerce, so not just delivering food, but in delivering anything around you. Groceries is just a starting point. Around a 5-kilometer radius and as quickly as physically possible to you, we believe that there are many different instances of this are really interesting. We launched groceries very, very prominently over the last year and a half, where our value proposition is we can get groceries to you in 20 minutes or less. But we also believe that this extends to many other verticals. We also launched pharmacies recently, especially in this context, it's important. When I was down sick in my bed and I was like, I really need a Panadol, being able to order on pharmacy and have that delivered to me in 30 minutes when I was feeling very, very down is a life-changing experience. You don't have to, mask up and drive to the pharmacy and take an hour and come back. And we really believe that these are really opportunities to help enable people and bring a lot of autonomy back into their lives. And so we really want to double down to that space. The quick commerce space is huge. There's so much opportunity to think about all the different things that are in your proximity that can be brought to you. That's where it is for now. But I can promise you that the ambitions are every year we'll find very, very new and exciting spaces for it to expand into and to serve our customers better.
Yeah, no, it's fabulous. Just love seeing what you're doing. I think the scope, the scale, to say different markets, different products. It's fascinating to hear the sort of things that you're doing. If there's one little bit of insight then that you would share, what do you see? You've mentioned on the show, you've sort of had your incarnation many times of your first version of yourself as a product leader, your latest version. What do you see the next sort of horizon is for you that you think you want to try challenge yourself to evolve to?
I think the journey is not done. We're now just in the beginning, in my opinion, of really building an organization that maximizes for context. Over the last year, I've been really obsessed about trying to find ways to bring our teams closer to the business and closer to our customers. I shared at Mind the Product a couple of months ago, the concept of having a concept of a business partner that actually sits with the squad to say, look, I don't want to be the middleman between the business and the product organization and the product teams and the product organization. Instead, let's find a way to bring that closer, to reduce the cycles and transition times and the learnings, because the reality is, we want to learn as quickly as we can on the business as we do on the product side. So how do we bring that closer together? The second thing that I'm also trying to challenge, and Khaled Rashad, our CTO, was the one to really pioneer and think about this and push our thinking. We spent some time with John Cutler recently as well to think about the concept of flow, right? How do you really maximize for flow, for learnings, and as you were mentioning, limiting work in progress so that the teams can really focus. And if you have focus, that's where maximum amount of learning really comes through. And as you optimize for flow of work, that's when things come out. That's where you learn the fastest. That's where you also get an opportunity to make sure that the next set of inputs are really valuable. So that's the next set of things that we want to optimize for, right? Where we're really challenging to say, well, what happens if you set a quarterly OKR and 2 weeks in, you have a big learning that says that, I should really pivot. How do we design a system that is not so rigid that says, you've already committed to these OKRs, come back again in 10 weeks and we can debate the next set of OKRs. But how do we provide that level of flexibility to allow the organization to organically say, these are very, very important bets. And as we have these bets, how do we pivot our way to make sure that, we get to the outcome that we want to? I think we're very early days in that. And what I want to obsess about is building the culture that allows for this learning, building this culture of unlearning as well, and shedding a lot of the weight of things that don't work, and building that culture where we have that obsession over the customer context and things like that. And to give you an example of that, I think it's important to try my best to role model some of this. As much as my calendar allows, and I'm trying my best to protect this time, is to also do customer calls every week, right? So we have 9 different markets. We have a bunch of different customers. I try and speak to individual customers. We set up time in half an hour, ask them about their last Talabat experience. What was like, and it's so interesting to hear about why people use it. I was really busy at work and I ordered lunch. Or, I had a birthday party and I was ordering for that. I really needed tomatoes for a dish I was cooking and I didn't have it. And that's why I ordered Talabat. And learning about, this didn't go well, this went well, and here's what I would do if I had a magic wand. It keeps you grounded. And I'd love to see more of that in the organization. So I think it's still day one for us. We have a lot to do. And as we scale, the organization and continue doubling in size to permeate this culture and permeate this way of thinking is exponentially harder. And that's what I want to obsess about.
Well, I tell you what, it's pretty energizing just listening to you talk about this stuff. Your passion for it flows through you. So you can see both what you're going to do and the teams you're going to work with are going to be successful. So keep it up. Love your spending time with customers as much as you can. I think it's just so important. And it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you very much, Yi-Wei, for sharing all your great stories, examples, and insights. I'm looking forward to having you in the show again in the future to hear how you get on with the next sort of few steps.
Thank you, Barry. Glad to be here.
I hope that show resonated. And if it did, I'd encourage you, take the small step. Email a colleague you think might appreciate it. Tag someone on Twitter. Share it with your network. That one small step can have a big impact to help others learn to unlearn. And then let